Let's move on to our next panel, investing in discovery. This one's going to be really good. We're going to welcome them up onto the stage right now, moderated by Dylan Tweney, executive editor at VentureBeat. We have Naval Ravikant, founder and CEO of AngelList, Chris Gottschalk, vice president of Blumberg Capital, Andreas Stavropoulos, managing director at DFJ, and Brian Pokorny, managing partner at SV Angel. Take it away, guys.
Wow, that was a very well choreographed reset of the stage. So thank you, ladies. That was amazing timing. We've got a panel of investors here, and I kind of want to see what their thoughts are on social discovery. I don't know that social discovery is a category per se. I don't think there are any social discovery funds. I'm not sure that there's anybody, any of you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of you are focused on investing in social discovery per se.
I think you guys are the trademark on it, right? So we can't use it without your, like the pan, anyway.
Yeah, so my question is, like, how do you guys think about social? What does it mean to you? Because, like, if we were in the app world, if you were talking to somebody who had made a great iPhone app, your first question would be like, that's an awesome app. You know, it could be awesome. I mean, doesn't matter really. It could be the most fantastic app in the world, but because there are 800,000 other apps in the App Store or in the Android App Store, the biggest problem is discovery, right? So how does that translate to the social world?
Two quick thoughts from me. Just the idea of having an app or a destination site per se, I think kind of defeats the whole purpose of discovery. The way I think about discovery is push versus pull, meaning whatever it is that you're trying to help someone discover, by definition, needs to be in places other than the real estate that you control yourself. So in some ways, I think about the biggest power of social discovery is in two words: promiscuity, meaning go and get whatever it is that is the personalized recommendation or discovery experience, not just in real estate that you control, but go put it widely out there, try to create some virality, some ability to do that. And of course, by being promiscuous, you also have to have good filtering and context awareness, meaning it has to be relevant, because if you're overtly promiscuous, then you're no different than spam.
No, you're talking about the app or the website or the social network that needs to have a sort of promiscuous character in terms of sharing with other networks that are out there, right?
Absolutely, and then be able to filter so that when I come back to an experience that feels it has been personalized for me, not something which is the same that everyone else would see. And that's the hard part, is understanding the context and personalizing on the fly, if you will.
I think this term social gets overloaded. There's two very distinct kinds of social. One is what large groups of people have voted for, and there's some algorithmic component to it. So Google PageRank is an example of link votes on the web, or Amazon's people who like this also like, or Dig style, or Hacker News, or Reddit style voting up is a form of social discovery, or Yelp, but it's by kind of the group. And then there's highly personalized, and Andreas is referring to just Twitter, Facebook, what do my friends, the people that I trust, that I follow, think. And very different kinds of things work, they fall into very different kinds of applications. So for example, if I'm buying a stereo or a digital camera, I kind of don't care what my friends bought. I didn't pick my friends because of their taste in digital cameras and stereos. So what the group or a relatively qualified group of people think is good enough. But if I'm consuming a taste-based product, like I'm buying a piece of clothing, or if I'm going to go watch a movie, I do care what my friends think, and I want to fit into that social circle. So the term social almost changes in meaning. So I think it's very important to draw those distinctions between kind of mass social and personalized social, or friend social might be the second category.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think it is a broad term. So when we're looking at companies, we're really looking for folks who are using this as a tool to deliver a better product or service. And they're really using it as an acquisition tool, as a personalization tool, and not as a pure business model.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of drill into this idea of promiscuity, Andreas, a little bit, because maybe you guys have some thoughts. The thing that jumps to mind for me immediately is Instagram, right? Because in the early days, Instagram was sort of a tool that augmented what you were already doing on Twitter or Flickr or Facebook, right? And it was only later that it kind of became its own network, and it did that kind of by building on the momentum and the sort of virality that it was able to create by reaching out to people through those other networks. Isn't that kind of a dangerous game, though? I mean, like, I think sort of Twitter and Facebook are wise to that now, and they're not going to let people build networks sort of through them as easily as before, right?
So to me, that just means you have to find different hooks. So the hook at the end for Instagram was it was not just a self-expression tool, but it also became a communications platform. Communications platforms, especially ones where you can modify self-expression elements and kind of stand out from a crowd, can be very powerful, because by definition, they're viral. The use of the product causes someone else to use the product as well. So whether it be companies like Tango now in our portfolio or others that use the same idea, which is start with a communication capability on top of which you layer discovery, not by having people think of themselves as curators. They're just doing what they're doing. They're playing games. They're communicating with their family and friends, yet passively, by utilizing the product, they're also helping the discovery promiscuity.
I also would say it's not too late. If you look at something like Vine, for example, it launched a few months ago. It remains at the top of the App Store, and Twitter hasn't really done anything in way of integration except to allow you to autoplay the Vine within the Twitter app, and it's continuing to grow because it's a compelling hook, as Andreas said.
Yeah, so certainly the days of people having one-click auto spam, other social networks to spread are gone. Twitter and Facebook don't want an Instagram clone, for example, having tons and tons of tweets saying, check out my photo, check out my photo, check out my photo. Unless you're Path. Different story. But if you're doing a genuine communication, you're saying, hey guys, I took this photo, you got to check it out. That's not something Twitter and Facebook want to stop. That's just natural to how the medium is used. So they're channels, just like email and the web are channels, or text messaging are channels. So the ability to programmatically spam them might not be something the platform owner likes, but people communicating is, of course, always good.
And what's interesting, if you look at the growth trajectory of each kind of next generation social product, they're growing faster and faster. And so the exponential curves are really moving steeper and steeper as we go down. So they're finding ways to leverage these networks, whether they want them to or not.
Well, you mentioned Path. I mean, I don't think Path is showing exponential growth necessarily.
Of course not.
Right.
I think if you look at Instagram and Spotify versus the previous generation of Facebook and LinkedIn and Pandora, you'll see that the curves, and these are obviously winners that we're cherry picking here, but the winners show more exponential growth than the prior generation.
And that's no surprise, right? When every new computing wave, right, eclipses the one before. When you have billions of mobile machines, all of us strapped around with 3 or 4 instead of 1 per desk in the office, you have more opportunities, and especially internationally, for these things to happen.
But if you look at the reason they're growing faster, a lot of it, I think, is dependent upon the App Store, the model of the App Store, where one app sits at the top. And if you talk about discovery or social discovery, there's 2 channels, the Play Store and the App Store, that basically determine the rankings. And if you can sustain at the top, then you grow with exponential speed because of the discovery mechanism.
Right. Well, that's certainly true in like the Apple Store, the Android Store, right? To a lesser extent true if you have something that's built, say, on the Facebook platform, right? Because they don't have quite the concentrated, power of, there's not a Facebook app store per se yet. Maybe there should be. Who's doing it right? We've mentioned some obvious, big winners. What about up and coming startups that you think are doing discovery right and kind of creating that sort of virality?
Look, I think there's some obvious models that work in other places in the world. Companies like Line or Kakao in Asia, where you're using, again, a communication substrate as a discovery mechanism for things like game titles that then can be monetized through virtual goods, what have you. So Tango, I mentioned before, is doing that right here. And I think it's a very interesting idea where, again, people come for the communication element, but passively discover. My mother started playing a game because she saw me dealing with this, and my son is doing it, must be. I was not thinking of curating a game experience. I was not thinking of making a recommendation, but the passive use of the platform got users for that title. So I think that's one example. Another example, just on the App Store real quick, expect the idea of an App Store, in my mind, especially with HTML5 and more dynamic ability to consume, let's say, app functionality. I think the idea of an App Store as a destination is going to be obsolete. Discovery will happen on the fly. We have companies like Everything.me in our portfolio that are still in beta stage, but they're experimenting with this idea of a launcher being your disembodied app store, where discovery of new functionality happens in line instead of, I have to go look it up, download it, install it, to even know what the heck it does.
Yeah, I think, living on the App Store is difficult. It's been proven difficult. I think there are several folks, though, who have found that distribution channel and have exploited it. I think, I'll give Snapchat an example. When I saw the numbers on what they're doing, that's very, very impressive. And not to tout our portfolio, but I think there are other models outside of the App Store, and leveraging traditional industry and attacking traditional industry. We have a company called Lendo that's using your social graph to provide microloans in emerging economies. And these are the type of companies that we find very interesting, leveraging social yet providing a service that's hundreds of years old.
So let's talk about location, because I forget who it was, but one of you mentioned sort of the multiple devices that we have now that kind of feeds into the discovery loop. Obviously, location is part of that, and being able to discover through social network services or people or things going on around you. How do you see that? Like, how far along are we in that evolution? Like, are people seeing traction? Are there startups seeing traction here? Is there...
Someone catch that Waze announcement?
Yeah.
I think
Waze, obviously, yes.
If you look at something like Tinder, for example, it's definitely based on location. It's based on your friend graph. It's based on friends in common. So, and then it's based in shortening the time in which you desire to meet somebody, because it's somebody near you that may have a mutual connection that you can communicate with instantly. So I think location is being integrated recently with things like Foursquare over the last few years, but I think it's early days for it really to be exploited. You're just seeing things like, all the ride-sharing apps as well that take that into control.
How's Tinder doing? I mean, I haven't seen numbers recently.
I haven't seen numbers. Anecdotally, it seems to be doing well based on just people word of mouth talking about it and using it in a variety of cities.
I think we've seen, though, that location alone isn't enough. We have a company called Sonar in our portfolio, and there's Highlight and Banjo, and those models have been proven difficult to monetize. And I think Foursquare is seeing that same problem as well. That location alone is not a business model, and so Waze has found a way to wrap location around a real service that's helpful, and I think you'll see the next wave of companies focus on that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think this idea of a context, where location adds to the context, but by itself, there was Looped even before and others, the idea that I chuck Facebook or everything else I'm doing elsewhere in the web just because of a location filter alone doesn't work. But as a piece of the context and a platform that informs others, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, I don't even really think of Waze as a social. It sort of has, I guess it has a crowdsourced component, but there's not really a network of
it's a first
around
category of social, which is crowd-voted social as opposed to your friend's social. You're not on Waze looking to see where your friends are driving. You're just looking to see what anyone credible is reporting about around you. I think that's exactly right. I don't mean to just keep echoing, but it's always location plus something. So I learned something here today, because if I line up the list of companies that haven't done well in location versus have done well, the latter category have always had location plus some highly in-context use case that just is made a lot better by giving up your location. I think people don't give up their location voluntarily for generic purposes, except maybe to the NSA, right? They don't, they don't choose to do that in a generic context. But if you give them an application, like you say, hey, you're going to get a date, or you're going to get a ride, or you're going to find out where there's a traffic jam, people will do it.
Or you want to protect your family, location labs, it's location, but it's not just about that. It's about personal mobile safety in general.
Right. Yeah, and I think trust is a big part of it too. You have to trust the application, you have to trust the way that the data is being used, or if you're getting data, you have to trust that it's from somebody that you feel is reliable. Somehow location data feels much more personal to me that way, because you're physically vulnerable, right? I don't know. Do you see the sense that do you think that people are reluctant to give up that information, to share their location? Because I'm not seeing that at all.
Without any shred of, there has to be something that they get back in exchange for it that's concrete.
But Foursquare has badges. You get badges. You could be the mayor.
If you look at how many people share their location as it pertains to where the picture was taken with Instagram, I don't think people are that reluctant to actually share their location. Maybe not their home address, but where they are in the moment. Like, I don't know, 50 or 60% of the photos I see have a location attached to it. So,
and I think two elements. One is the time delay, right? So sometimes a picture can get posted, but there can be the fact that I was somewhere. I think most of us assume that if you live and walk around, just look at the cameras out there. In general, your location at a point in time is something which is very hard to keep private. When it comes to real-time and stalking-like type functionality, I think it can get more scary for people, and then it's an element of precision. There are a lot of dating and other apps I know you guys are going to talk about in panels today that specifically do not pinpoint the location down to the meter, but may give you a radius which is still good enough to do the job, but without being too creepy.
Yeah, this is something I think actually
it's going to get even more fine-grained. I think a lot of the interesting Google Glass apps will not only know location, but also orientation, angle, exactly where you're looking, which way you're facing, how high up you're looking, right? So the data
if your eyes are open or closed.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know yet what those applications will be, but you can imagine that even location as a category is too broad of a word.
This may be a little bit of a sidebar, but I think actually Instagram needs to think pretty hard about that location thing, because there are apps now that are built on top of Instagram. And I only discovered this because I have a 12-year-old. There are apps like InstaChat, which lets you chat with other Instagram users using the Instagram platform. And one of the things that it does is it will show you a map of all the Instagram photos around you. And one of my daughter's friends was right there with like 50 photos right on the map, right where she lives, like immediately discoverable like that. And I think it's not. There is some education that needs to go on. But to the point about whether people are willing to share that, I think I agree with you, very much are. So when you're looking at the investment prospects in social, what are the areas in the next, that you think, in the next 3 to 5 years will be particularly promising, sort of in terms of your investment horizon? What are you focused on now in terms of social?
Well, I'll say this element of push versus pull, meaning if you think of the web and, functionality or apps for that matter, in terms of the user has to go somewhere and express their intent, write down a keyword or search firm or tell a lot about what they're intending to do, versus what we're coming more and more to be used to, which is the phone knows and predicts, or my car knows where I'm going or should be, and it brings the information to me. It's a much harder problem to solve, to be able to do it push with enough sort of fidelity so that you're not annoying the user, you don't have a lot of false positives, you're not missing a lot of false negatives. Yet if you can do it right, it's really powerful functionality. So what I mentioned before in terms of the App Store going away and app discovery happening in the context of what you're doing or how you're using your device itself, without you even thinking about it, for example. Things like search being redefined. I don't have to tell the machine what I'm looking for. It comes to me in the context of what it is I'm doing, yet it does it without annoying me. So platform capabilities like that from a VC's perspective we like, because they can build very large horizontal kind of big companies. The challenge with all of them is the killer app. Do you have enough of a first product that is a killer app experience that goes and gets the first set of users that then spreads from there? That's always the challenge. We love platforms and sometimes bet on killer apps that don't succeed.
Yes, so a couple of spaces. I mentioned Lendo. Financial services broadly is something that we're very interested in. And when you think about any traditional service industry kind of disrupting the service economy is what we look for, and folks are using social and discovery to disrupt and attack those markets. In addition to that, I think connected devices is an interesting one. Any company that's building a platform and allowing other businesses or enterprises to surface that personalization and discovery is very interesting. So we've looked at that space quite a bit as well.
For me, I really just listen to the entrepreneur. What problem are they solving? So if you take Will Call, for example, a founder named Donnie loves concerts, loves music, wants to be able to go see shows locally nearby him. Last minute, a push notification alerts when a friend buys a ticket, alerts you to a new band you may not have heard of, you can go see it. So really, there's general trends we look at investing in, but it's who is the founder, what is this problem, and is that a relatable problem that can have mass adoption?
Yeah, by definition, social adoption is really hard to predict for any individual, but it's the crowd that's going to do the predictions, it's going to have emergent properties, and us sitting around are not going to figure out the next big wave. That said, I just have a personal inclination towards both commerce and financial services. Commerce, we had Wanilo up here earlier, there's Wish, there's Pinterest, and you're finally seeing commerce discovery happening socially like it does offline a lot. And I think the other interesting one is exactly what Chris was talking about with financial services. Saw a company recently, Puddle, where they're kind of doing micro loans. It's Kiva founder, so they're doing that socially. And even in a sense, Bitcoin and Ripple and a lot of these cryptocurrencies are social money that are regulated and controlled and minted and spent by the community, maintained by the community. So I think that's a fascinating concept.
Are there specific things that you look for in terms of traction? I mean, you mentioned that you look at the entrepreneur and kind of their vision and their background and their their plan. But what sort of evidence or metrics can you?
We invest at the very earliest stages. So what I look for personally, I guess, is it a better function of a existing app? So if you look at Snapchat, for example, they can allow you to send a picture message 10 times faster than SMS alone. And regardless if it disappears or not, it's just a better, quicker utility for sending picture messages. And it's also falls into this thesis I've had, which is the picture is a communication, less than about capturing a moment. And it's going to be more and more about a quicker, faster way to communicate with people. So you just look at these patterns or these ideas or concepts that exist on larger platforms that can be done better, at least for us at the earliest stages.
Yeah, a little later on when we typically get involved, meaning sort of the true Series A or sometimes even Series B, we are looking for evidence of early adoption of some kind. It's okay to be qualitative, by that I mean if you've limited the beta group to a smaller group, we're looking at the qualitative kind of funnel and maybe individual user performance and user metrics instead of just the raw numbers. But we definitely want to see some proof point of something that we can touch and play with.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're seed stage investors, so many times we invest pre-product, pre-revenue. And so we're looking for strong teams attacking large markets and finding out what their unique and unfair advantages. It's quite simple at the early stage. We also do Series A, and when we look at Series A, we hope that there's some milestones and some proof points, but many times it's too early, so we fall back on those three earlier categories.
Yeah, I would say I've seen way too many great entrepreneurs bash their head against social and not be able to get product market fit. It's so precise, and there's so much competition that I almost have to see some evidence of the market adopting it. Because I think a lot of great entrepreneurs with the best of intentions will create finely crafted, beautiful products and miss the market by a hair. And it's just impossible to predict in advance.
Yeah, I would tend to lean that way too. Let's sort of show me the evidence, show me the traction. I mean, I'm not investing obviously, but I see a lot of pitches.
There are times though when you, for example with Vine, when you just use it and it feels unique and special. It happens once every 2 years with a social app. But there are moments where you just kind of instinctively know this is different, this is unique, this feels natural to use. And there's moments like that you can invest pre-traction as well.
I think you know that. I'm not sure most of us could figure that out, but
yeah, I don't feel the magic with Vine
right, we
myself.
need to be in the demo.
But the first time you use Instagram, you do get that feeling like there's something special here. It's quicker, it's faster, it's snappier. It just makes things that seemed hard before easy. So there's definitely some element to that. It's like the first time you use Quora on the web, you're like, wow, how are they doing all that? There's a lot of magic here.
Yeah, and the magic is not necessarily about, they pick just the right color for or the right font or the right, rounded corners or whatever. There's something serendipitous about the structure of the service. It's not just fiddling with design, I don't think. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier, and you said you sort of look for platforms, Andreas, that can be built on, and then killer apps to power those platforms. In the whole social world, identity, it seems like, is a really key aspect of platform. And right now it's sort of divided up. Your identity could be owned by Google or by Facebook or by Twitter. I think maybe Microsoft is making a play here too, Apple. So there are a lot of large players that have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users upon which an identity platform could be based. Is that something that you guys are concerned about in terms of, is there going to be consolidation among these identity platforms? Is there a risk to building identity on one or the other, and kind of who owns my identity as an end user? Is that relevant?
Yeah, so you mentioned Microsoft. Microsoft has had multiple attempts so far to become the, sort of disembodied wallet or identity provider for a whole bunch of others. And obviously the players you mentioned make a lot of sense. To the extent people are vertically integrated like Apple or even in some cases Google, meaning that they want to be the medium of exchange because they want to take a cut, it's a little more difficult to be a true Switzerland. So I think there's still room for what we used to call infomediary type businesses. So businesses where in the end, you as the consumer, you own your identity. The reality is you own that identity. And therefore, if you're giving up anything of it, you're expecting some value in return. You might be happy, as I am, to give piece of it to Apple because that means that with one click, or Amazon, with one click, I can do purchases. I don't have to fill forms again. I don't have to prove who I am all over again, what have you. That has real value to me. It's a trade-off I'm doing consciously. Is there such a thing as a disembodied play with identity? I think definitely. And as I predict about the functionality and the kind of value they could add to the system, other than just the transactional element, some companies have approached it by doing like phone-based wallets, RF, or otherwise. It hasn't been proven that was frankly enough to do it. But if, for example, you could use my phone to validate who I am to make my even real world experience better in some way, I'm not going to go too much into it other than saying, look at what Lemon is trying to do and some other companies like that. That could have real value to me, and it could create an opportunity for a platform which is unrelated to the big guys today. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, like Naval was saying, if you think about what is digital cash of the future, and is there such a thing as a digital cash wallet of some kind, and especially married with identity? Those are interesting questions, interesting space.
Yeah, so you're echoing in a strange way an essay by Jaron Lanier in the New York Times last weekend, where he talked about sort of how all this information about me flows out into the world, and companies are building billion-dollar businesses on top of it, but nothing really is coming back to me as an individual or as a content creator. Lanier's a little off the wall, but now, I mean, you're sort of talking about there may be a demand for that kind of thing.
I'm a little optimistic in thinking that long-term, the slow and steady trend is towards users owning more and more of their identity. And for example, Microsoft's older attempts at identity were obvious naked land grabs by Microsoft to control and own your wallet. It was just too obvious. So nobody else wanted to adopt it. It was too early. It didn't offer enough in return. And the users don't want to give up their identity. I think longer term, users are either taking control of their identity more and more. You see with custom domains or about.me pages where they kind of own more of it. Or users are having multiple identities. They just create them on the fly and they discard them and use them as needed. So long term, I think the killer app in the space is much more an open federated system, something closer to Mozilla's Persona or Bitcoin's public key encryption, but obviously made simple for the average user, as opposed to a single online service that is playing Panopticon or the Eye of Mordor that's watching everything, controlling everyone. So.
Well, both of those things are still a little bit like, if you're not a member of the EFF, you're probably not a user of.
Well, but I think one thing you'll find from a lot of mobile app developers is a lot of them go in and create their app and they say Facebook login only, and we all know how that story ends, right? There's a large vocal minority, and it is large enough that will just refuse to log in with Facebook identity that you always have to go in and add another way to do it.
And just to echo that, we think there'll be multiple identities online. Some will be true identities, some will be anonymous. And so we look at opportunities in the verification space. We have a company called TrueYou out of Vancouver who's verifying your identity for folks who need to do it, whether it's government and you want to access services online, et cetera. So, we firmly believe that there will be multi-platforms, there'll be multi-homing moving forward, and you'll have identities across all of those services.
I think it's tough to just have one identity. If you look at the way you interact throughout the day at work versus in the evenings versus at a barbecue versus on a trip, your identity shifts throughout the context of who you're with. And I think the social apps, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, for an engineer for example, their identity is on GitHub for their professional talent. And I think it's too difficult to consolidate all of those things, and there's multiple identities depending on the context in which you're meeting or interacting with someone, whether it be in real life or online.
That's absolutely right. And building on that, there are different social graphs for every use case. You try and use one social graph for different use cases, you'll often find it just fails.
Well, we might think that, but Facebook might think differently.
I think Facebook hopes differently, just like Microsoft hoped that you could use a Hotmail login for everything forever. Imagine if we were all stuck with Hotmail addresses trying to log into everything.
We'd all feel really
It was great
uncool.
once upon a time.
Identity is different than what app you use to authenticate just to find some of your friends, though. I don't think that defines identity per se.
Right.
So authentication is a little different than identity online, I would say.
But it's one of these perfect examples we were talking about before. We can all agree that a third-party, Switzerland-like identity provider for different purposes, or multiple ones, would be a great sort of network effect situation to be in. The problem is getting from here to there is not something that pundits can agree on, people just do. You need to give a killer app value for people to take that first step, and that's always the hard part with all these businesses.
Or you build something that's simple and open, and the app developers know that they're not giving up the user to some third party by forcing that sign up. So I think that's where Mozilla Persona is really interesting. I haven't dug in the technical details, but at a conceptual level, it's probably the most interesting open source identity solution to come along in a decade.
Cool. Something I'm going to look into. We have just a couple minutes. I would love to hear your thoughts on social discovery in the enterprise, because we've been talking entirely consumer for this half hour. Is there an enterprise role for discovery and social identity? How does that make sense? And who's doing it?
I think huge. I mean, people have talked about the consumerization of the enterprise forever. In our shop, we invest quite a bit in software as a service platform. We were in Yammer and a few others that brought the whole idea of collaboration happening sort of on the fly in an unstructured way, yet in a way that doesn't have to be inefficient by waiting to be at the water cooler at the right time when you hear the right thing about the right project that brings the light bulb up. So platforms, again, like that have the ability to start with a killer app idea can be very effective. And again, this idea of push versus pull. In an enterprise, even more so than in my personal life, knowing of all the emails that I'm getting, of all the different demands that are placed on my time, of all the things placed on my calendar, how to prioritize, how to maybe even make trade-offs.
Yeah,
huge functionality.
I need discovery just for my inbox, actually. Other thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it earlier. It's a space that we're very interested in. Insights and discovery within the enterprise unlock tremendous amounts of value, and whether that's understanding who your customers are versus what you think your customers are. We have a company called Mentad. The tagline is social sales. So I think there's tremendous value that the enterprises can gain from finding those insights.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. I want to hear from each of you just quickly. What is the category of social startup pitch that you never want to hear again? Too many. Naval.
Social, local, mobile, whatever, unless it's working.
Unless it's working. Okay, nice out there.
I guess this is tangential, but crowdfunding platforms. I've heard about 100 of those in the last 2 months.
Okay, Andreas.
I've learned never to say never. Same ideas are coming back. I mean, I've been in this business since '99 or so, so it's not that long, yet it's already been a couple of cycles. Same ideas are coming back, and the timing makes all the difference. So I will take exception to the question.
Okay, I have a social, local, mobile, something for you.
I took 3 years off and was at a startup daily booth. And I've just been back in investing for the last 3 or 4 months. So I'm not burnt out on any pitch right now. The thing I like the most is just when they're trying to solve their own problem and it's authentic and a genuine thing they're passionate about.
Okay.
Yeah, and no good investor artificially categorizes themselves and blocks themselves out of something that could be working. I mean, I think no investor would have said to you, I'm looking for a photo text messaging solution where the photos disappear and people use it for all kinds of crazy purposes, right? But then here comes Snapchat. So you just never know.
All right, well put. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And thank you.